Hi, today we're going to learn how to sharpen a knife. Melissa asked for a demonstration on how to cut a tomato, and usually to cut a tomato you need a really sharp knife. That's really the key, so that's what we're going to do first, and then we'll show you how to cut a tomato. We got a couple different kinds of knives here. This is a stamped blade. It's a Santoku. Stamped blades are thin, alright? Forged blades will have a hilt on the back. Like that. Okay? The forging process when making knives actually removes some of the carbon out of the blade. So a forged blade will have a slightly lower carbon amount than a stamped blade, which actually means that a stamped blade can be sharpened slightly sharper, however the edge will not be kept on it as long. Lots of people use stamped blades. There's nothing wrong with them. They're generally cheaper because they didn't take as much work to put into them, and there's nothing wrong with using them. This is my, everyday knife that I love to use. I just like how it feels in my hand. They spent more money on it, and it just feels better, so I like my knife. But stamped, forged, doesn't matter. The key to sharpening a knife, first, is to create a good bevel. Now, a bevel, you probably won't be able to see it here, but the bevel is the edge that runs along the bottom of the blade here. Alright? And to make a bevel, you're using your stone and you're scraping along the blade in both directions to create a bevel. And I made a little diagram here. A good bevel is 20 degrees. Alright? So imagine this is your blade. Alright? If it's sitting straight here. Okay, so now that's sitting at a 90-degree angle. Alright, so you cut it in half, and you got yourself a 45-degree angle. You cut that in half again, and you got about a 22-degree angle. I don't know anybody that can get exactly 18 or 20 degrees, so just shoot for 20 or 22, or basically 90, cut it in half again, and you got a good bevel. You'll do the same on this side. You got 90 here, you cut it in half, you cut it in half again, you got a good bevel. That's the most important part about sharpening your knife, is having the right angle. So I have a tri-stone here. A tri-stone I picked up at the hardware store. It cost $20. I've been using it for 3 years. It works great. You can spend a lot more money on stones, and it does make a difference. But, if you're just starting out, something like this is just fine. You want to use mineral oil. Okay, don't use olive oil, vegetable oil. It'll get all gummy. It should only be mineral oil on your stone. Alright, and a tri-stone is called a tri-stone because it has 3 sides. You have the coarse side, alright? You have a medium grit side, and you have a fine grit side, alright? When you're sharpening your knife, it's usually best to actually do all 3 sides, even if you don't use all 3 of them for a long time, because it helps to sand the end of your blade down to a smooth surface, which will have a cleaner cutting. You don't need a lot of oil, just a couple drops. This bottle of mineral oil will last you years. Okay. You want to make sure your blade is nice and clean before you try to use the stone. You don't want to get any food on here because it's really hard to get off. Everything's clean. Alright? So, what do? We start with that 90-degree angle. We bring it down in half to the 45, and we bring that down in half again. And you'll notice how I'm holding my hands. Alright? This hand has no pressure on the blade. All it's doing is holding the blade at this angle. This is the hand that's guiding the blade that has pressure. And the reason you want to remember this is because if you're having pressure with this hand and you're pushing with pressure with your left hand, you're going to cut yourself. Alright? So the only pressure on any hand is the hand that's pushing the blade away from you. Okay? So this hand is just resting, holding up the blade. This hand is pushing with downward force towards the stone and away from you. Alright? Keeping that 20-degree angle, and follow the curvature of the blade. The Santoku here doesn't have much curvature, alright? So make a couple sweeps, and we'll come back. Once again, 90 degrees, 45, 20. And this time again, this hand, no pressure, this hand is pulling the blade downwards and towards you. Alright? You'll do this a few times, depending on how dull your blade is, when the last time you sharpened it was. On the coarse stone, you are recreating that bevel. As you cut through things, the bevel slowly gets worn away. Often depends on the hardness of your cutting board. If you have a rubber cutting board, those are really hard on your knives. Wood or the polyurethane are pretty good. Alright. If you have too much oil, it can be kind of slick. Just wipe your blade off. Now often, at this stage in your sharpening, you can actually feel the metal curving back up around it. And it'll look something like this if you had a microscope. You would see, assuming that this is the blade, the end of it is starting to fold up. And that's how you know your bevel is as fine as it's going to be. You've taken both sides and the metal's at that nice fine tip there. Alright, so you can actually feel that by pulling away from the blade. Usually in the direction that you sharpened it last. And if you feel it catch on your thumb, you know you've created the bevel. Alright, and I'm feeling a little bit of catching up here, not so much down here at the bolster. Alright, so I might do a couple more down here at the base. And now I'm feeling it all the way up. And of course I won't feel it so much on this side, because it's whatever side you sharpen last that it's going to fold. So now I'm going to feel it on this side. It folds the opposite direction of where you sharpen last. Here it's smooth. Alright? So now we'll switch over to the medium grit, which is this one. Once again, not too much oil. And at this point we've already created the bevel. So now we're just sanding it down to a fine polish. We probably won't do so many on this side. Maybe, 5 or 6 passes. Keep that angle. It's got to be the 22 or 20. Okay, and we'll switch to the fine grit. Now at this point, you actually want to do some passes where there's not a lot of pressure. Alright, this is where you're really honing the blade down. And it's, the lighter you go, actually the sharper you're going to get. It's nice and gentle. This is that final sanding moment. Okay, I'm going to pause here so I can wash my hands for a second. And we're back. So now that we've sharpened our blade, we're going to hone the blade. Okay, now you hone with the steel. And what a steel does, if you look, you probably can't see it, but if you've ever seen a steel, it's full of really fine little grooves, okay? You can get steels that have much finer grit than this. I think this is 1,000. They come in 500, 1,500, alright? And what a steel does is these little grooves catch any burrs that may have formed on the edge of your blade while you're sharpening it. If you look at a blade under a microscope, it'll look very jagged. This straight edge that we see here is not actually straight. The metal's twisted in all sorts of different directions from us rubbing it against a rock, essentially. Alright, so it's not as smooth as it may look, and this burring device will remove the burrs. Once again, you want to have that 20-degree angle. So we'll start on half, and half again, and half again. Okay? Now, you're not pushing on the steel with your blade. You're just letting the steel rest and the blade slide against it. Alright? Same on this side. At this point, the steel is just slightly resting on top of the blade, sliding down. You are rubbing a piece of metal against another piece of metal. So the more you press on this, the more you're dulling your blade. All you're trying to do is remove microscopic burrs. Alright, so the more you push, the more detriment to your blade you're doing. You don't need to be fancy, you don't need to be awesome, just be gentle. You're removing microscopic particles. Think about that for a second, alright? We're talking about microscopic stuff here. Okay. Nice and gentle, keep that angle. Now, you can test your blade to see if it's sharp by cutting something, alright? Just, you know, some vegetables and seeing if it's sharp or not. A lot of people will use newspaper or parchment paper if you don't have newspaper. So here's a piece of parchment paper, and you'll just hold it slightly in the air. And basically, you'll know your knife is sharp if you can cut through it without having any pressure on it. Okay? So it went right through, it didn't tear, no tearing. Alright, so we know our knife's pretty sharp. And that's how you do that. One little tip. This is a Santoku. Like I said, the blade is pretty straight. Alright. So let's say we want to sharpen a blade that's not straight. This is a chef knife that I bought in an emergency when I forgot my knives at work one day. It's really cheap, but it works well if you put a good sharpening edge on it. So, the key with a chef knife is you have to follow the curvature of the blade. Alright. That's a little too much oil. Take a little off. Okay, so the curvature of the blade, you're following it. If you just go straight on this blade, eventually the blade will become straight, and then you won't have that rocking motion with your chef knife that you need. Alright, so just watch that motion. You're following the curvature of the blade. Okay? Please notice that the fingers follow where the pressure is on the blade. If you leave your fingers back here and you're sharpening up here, it's going to be warping the blade this way and you won't get a good edge on your knife. So the fingers follow with the pressure. Alright? That's why we're taking multiple passes. So your fingers can adjust to where the blade is on the stone, so you can have the pressure on the knife where it's touching the stone. That's important. You can sharpen a blade all day and not really get an edge on it if your fingers are in the wrong place. The fingers follow the stone. These fingers are always over the stone. Alright? You move the blade, fingers stay on top of the stone. And you follow the curvature of the blade. Keeping that angle, 20 degrees. Alright. Feel for the bevel. Not quite there. I haven't sharpened this knife in a long time. Alright. Got some sliding going on. Alright. Feel for the bevel. Starting to feel some catching on this side. Not quite too much though. Alright, we're getting somewhere. Go to the medium grit. This got a lot of oil on there. Don't need too much more. Keep following that curvature. Almost like a semicircular motion. And we'll move over to the fine grit. Keep that angle. Once again, this side you can be more delicate with. You're just shining it up. Okay. We'll hone the blade. Once again, no pressure on the steel, just nice and light. The blade's just resting on top of the steel, or the steel is just resting on top of the blade. Keep that 20-degree angle. And we'll see if she's sharp. Take a look. Not too sharp. So, we go back. We sharpen a little bit more. Go back to the medium side. And the fine. All right. And here's looking at us. And we got a nice cut. Alright, so that's your basics on how to sharpen a knife. I hope you learned something. I need to sharpen this knife a little bit more, but you don't need to watch that. You get the idea. And hopefully you'll have sharp knives now. Good luck.